Alright.
Okay.
Okay.
Alright, I want to thank y'all for coming. We're going to make it hard and to the point. But before I do that, I got to bring up a brother who will be dealing with next week. We've been talking for quite a while via internet and on telephone. And he's very influential, of course, you know. Maybe few of you don't know. But through YouTube, the internet has been a good vehicle for us to bring information, unite, galvanize, and make moves. So being here in Springdale, Maryland, allowed me to be close to Brother Haneef, who I'm going to be dealing with in the next 2 weeks with Sabir Bey and Taj Tariq Bey. So you guys are invited to come down. But I want to get you up here, say a few words for us, Brother Haneef. I don't have nothing prepared to say. I know you're going to be touching on birthright, so I'm going to give what I have on that and why that is important. Why not only do I feel it's important, but why it really is important. I'm going to go straight into nationality, because without having a proper nationality, you don't really have birthrights to any certain region of the world. Now, some people will say when you get so religious, oh, we God's children and we have birthright anywhere on the earth. That's what, especially when you deal with a lot of the, what they say, black nationalists, you know, we're the original man and we native everywhere. But the important, especially when you're dealing with the fictitious borders that the Europeans have set up, you've got to know that you're native here to the Americas and that you weren't brought here on a slave ship. And when you logically look at the whole slave ship aspect of things, it's not even, it doesn't even make common sense to think that everybody here who's so-called black was brought here on a slave ship. You know, when you look at the numbers and you think that the Europeans have never been more than 10% of this world's population. They've never exceeded that number. And to think that they were able to come to North America, get rid of everybody who was here, go to the islands, go to South America, wipe out almost the whole population, you know, then go to Africa and refill this whole area back up with Africans. And just think about technology at that time and the amount of people who were doing this, because the thing is, I just said that, you know, the Europeans never made more than 10% of this world's population, but it's not all the Europeans who did it. It was a minority of them. You know, because that's a view that a lot of our people have, is that, and the history classes further this belief that, you know, all white people own slaves. You know, I'm just using that term. You know, nobody's black, nobody's white. But a lot of our people have that view that all Europeans own slaves. And that's so far from the truth. It was actually a minority of them, you know what I mean, that own slaves. So the majority of them are actually working hand in hand with the slaves. They just were paid a little bit better and were able to go home and marry and live a so-called normal life. You know what I mean? But the majority of them did not own slaves. And if you want to know who they were, just trace the money. You know, the families who have been rich for over 100-something years, those are the ones that somehow, some way had their hands in that whole forced servitude. Because when you get into the etymology of things, we know that we weren't slaves. You know what I mean? Because even when you deal with the origin of that term, it was, I can't even remember exactly what, the Germanic people. Slavic. Yeah, they had oppressed the Slavic people so bad that that name had become synonymous, you know, with being in forced servitude or being oppressed. So they would say, oh man, he's a Slav, you know what I mean, or it became slavery. So that's where that whole thing came from. So there's a lot that has to change. Like we talked about earlier, Obama ain't changing nothing. We're so far deep into this rabbit hole that only revolution, only a serious, extreme, radical change will actually, you know, that's what it's going to take. It's not going to be nothing modern. It's not going to be nothing overnight. You know what I mean? But back to the birthright thing, what I was originally going to talk about, the importance of nationality and birthright is this. Right now, a lot of our people think we got to go back to Africa for equality. Even they may not come out and say it, but their actions show that that's what they believe, that we need to go back to Africa. When no nation in Africa has ever stood up and said, free my brothers. There's actually no nations in Africa in their history that they have a trace of records of even losing that many millions of people. You know what I mean? So that whole slave trade thing is totally over-exaggerated, but the importance of the birthright is you have to know what you're entitled to. You know, when the Russians came into Afghanistan and found the oil fields, the first thing that the Afghans did was nationalize the oil fields. And that was kind of caused a conflict because the Russians found it in Afghanistan and they wanted it. You know what I'm saying? But the Afghans don't be nationalized, and this is going to be property of the people. So that's where the nationality comes in at. You see, because as we go around as black, Afro-American, Negro, and colored, that's the status. There's no nationality in that, especially when you're talking about African-American. You just named three continents, really. Now, a lot of us know that when people say American or America, they're abbreviating the United States of America, which is the Union of Colonies. So I'm not going to get into the whole America's not a country thing, because most people use the term America, they're talking about the United States of America. Now we do know the Americanas or the Americanos and all of that, but the birthright is very important. That's why, I mean, like earlier we had the Black Panther documentary on. A lot of the movements weren't able to sustain or fail because they were lacking in nationality. You know, like when you think about the Black Wall Street, it upsets me to watch that. I have a documentary on that about the Black Wall Street. It had some actual survivors on there. It upsets me to watch what happened because they were almost doing the right thing. They were separate. They weren't sovereign. Because you hear people try to say that the people in the Black Wall Street in Tucson, Oklahoma, you all familiar with that? You know, when they're over 20,000, they try to say like 2,000 or 3,000. That don't even make sense. Yeah, you know, over 20,000 brothers. You know, a whole town that had their own water supply, power supply, schools, hospitals. They had everything. You know what I mean? They were building automobiles, but they didn't have their own government. They didn't have their own constitution. They had their own law enforcement, but it was still under the, you know, the auspices of Oklahoma State. It wasn't like totally separate. You see, so when you have nationality, you understand, okay, I need my own government, constitution, and once you got your government constitution, you need the military. You know, so there's a lot of things. Like I was just watching the video, and this is where, as Moorish, we got to open up to outside of the temple, because you know, I'm watching the video about the I can't even pronounce the name now, but the Nantangi Moors or something like that. Not even Moors, but the Nantangi Indians in Rhode Island. You know, and they're going through something with the federal government and the state government in Rhode Island because they were selling cigarettes and they weren't charging the tax. But the point of that is, all those people in that video look like us in here. And the woman even said it. The woman even said it. She was like, a lot of the locals, Europeans, we got to stop calling them locals and Americans. But a lot of, this is her words, she said a lot of the locals will say, y'all don't look like Americans. I mean, y'all don't look like Native Americans. You see what I'm saying? But they actually do. You know what I mean? Because a lot of us will have, not in here, but we'll have that mentality of the Mexican phenotype. The stringy hair, you know what I mean? When the Seminole Indians, so-called Indians, look like the people in here. They were actually dark. They were way darker than us. You know what I mean? So we got to get that view that's pumped into our heads in schools of the very, you know, the no shirt on, the Indian with the feathers, and all of that. You know what I mean? Because that's a myth that they put up. There's a video right now going around on YouTube called "We Were Here First." And this is what's funny about this is that, you know, the Europeans don't give us credit for anything. Now this is their scientists, all of them. It's not altered, saying they were going by some bones that they say were about over 10,000 years old, some fossils that they found in Brazil. They doctored it all up and said this was, in their terms, a Negroid person. So they're saying that the Negroid were the first people here in America. And this is not to take anything away from those who would be considered Latino or Mexican, because they're indigenous and they're aboriginal. So it's not to take anything away from them, because what happened is a lot of our own people will get so caught up in we were here first, and we get caught up, we're taking accomplishments away from Asians, accomplishments away from, you know, all the Olmecs, the Mayans, you know what I mean? So we can go a little bit too far with the original man theory, you know what I mean? But as far as the birthrights, we need to know that people who look like me, people who look like everybody in here, have birthrights here, not in Africa. There's only one nation that I know of so far right now in Ghana, in Africa, and that's Ghana, that will grant you equal citizenship as soon as you land there. Anybody, this is official. Ghana is, that I know so far, and if there's any other, let me know, you know what I mean? But Ghana is the only nation in Africa that I know that is willing to accept anybody who's considered black as a national citizen. You see what I'm saying? So we're caught up in this, we're from Africa thing, which has some substance, but we weren't all brought here from Africa. Especially brothers like you can look at me and Brother Diallo. You know, we don't necessarily have all the hair on our face. You know what I mean? A lot of brothers with that phenotype, we are native. We are aboriginal. You know what I mean? So the birthright thing is definitely very important. That's actually when you deal with sovereignty, as far as I'm concerned, that's why I stay open-minded to all the movements. but I'm not willing to put my energy into everything if it's not dealing with sovereignty, if it's not dealing with even nationality. We don't need, like there was a comment, somebody had said something on one of the internet videos about stop complaining and start a movement. There's movements that have been started.